This is Dream Power Radio, the place where your dreams turn into reality. Here is your host, Debbie Spector-Weissman.
Hello, 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 and welcome to Dream Power Radio. This is a place where we talk about dreams, both daytime and nighttime dreams, and how you can use them to make the internal shift to a life you love and rediscover the truth of who you really are. Well, today we're going to get into a topic that's vital for anyone who wants to live her dream life, and it's one that doesn't get talked about enough: sex. You may think that it's funny that I say that, since sex is all around us. Well, ads that tell us what we need to do to look or act sexy. Our entertainment is filled with stories that highlight all aspects of sex. But that's it. We see all these images, but we don't really talk about the reality behind them. I mean, what constitutes a healthy sex life? Is what's right for one person right for everybody else? Is sex synonymous with love? How do we learn how to be good sex partners? What do we do to spice up our sex lives? And how do we overcome problems that might arise in the bedroom? So many questions to ask. But fortunately, I've brought someone in here today that can help answer these questions and more. Certified sex therapist, Heather Shannon. Heather's take on sex is that one size doesn't fit all. She helps her clients explore and embrace their own authentic sexuality and learn how to be master communicators in and out of the bedroom. Heather's been featured in many national publications and hosts the podcast Ask a Sex Therapist. Welcome to Dream Power Radio, Heather.
Thank you, Debbie. I appreciate the lovely introduction and excited to talk with you and your listeners about sex today.
Okay, so tell me, Heather, what does it mean to have a good sex life? Is it only just about the orgasm?
Definitely not. I actually think when we focus too much on orgasm, we're kind of attaching to an outcome. And what I've found also being a mental health therapist is anytime we're attaching to an outcome, we're increasing our anxiety, right? And so what I find is then people just kind of get in their head. They're not being as present with their partner. They're not even being as present with themselves when they're too attached to that outcome of orgasm. And so I also look at it like we can give ourselves orgasms. Like, let's be honest, right? Like if it was really just about that, then like, what's the incentive? So to me, the incentive is really about connection. It's really about let's explore something together. Let's express ourselves to each other. Yes, orgasm is fun. So we're not like crossing that off the list either. But I think by being more just like present and, kind of mindful and like in your body really instead of in your head, it's just more fun for everybody.
Yeah. So it's really kind of the same as it is in all aspects of life. Communication
100%.
is
Yes. Yes, exactly. Sometimes I joke that like sex is about everything else and everything else is about sex.
Yeah, but it kind of works out that way.
It's super holistic. Yeah.
Right. So when it comes to sex, what is the biggest problem that you see with your clients?
I mean, I do think people getting in their head is a really big problem, but probably the most common one is probably libido related. And that's actually been the most popular episode of my podcast too. So that kind of confirms that for me a little bit. Libido is also super holistic. It's very mind, body, and spirit. And, people are confused about it. And I have to say, before becoming a sex therapist, I was confused about it too. Like, I didn't know there was stuff that's in your control and things you can change and
Well,
things you
let
can
me just
heal
stop you there.
from.
Let me just stop you there. Can you actually control your libido?
Yeah, I mean, yes. I'm gonna go with yes. It's not like that simple of an answer, it's maybe not 100% black and white, but personally, even like I've gone through periods of time where I have a higher libido. I've gone through periods of time where I have a lower libido. And when you start to understand the factors that cause the higher or the lower libido, then you have the ability to take some action to change them. So if you realize, hey, I'm not fully over a breakup, or my libido's lower, maybe even as a self-protective mechanism because I don't want to be vulnerable and I don't want to take those risks, then you can do some healing work to work on that. So it's not like an instantaneous thing typically, Or you might just go to your doctor and realize, oh, my testosterone's super low. Okay. That's a pretty quick fix.
Well, certainly that's the case as we women get older. I mean, you can see I'm a little bit older than you and have gone through menopause, and that
Uh-huh.
just totally, in my case, turned my libido totally upside down. It's
Yes.
like, what do you mean I don't feel like doing it? What's wrong with me?
Right. And nothing's like wrong with you per se, but I also feel really strongly that, not just as women, probably as humans, but as people who are, estrogen based beings, let's say, and as people who have a vulva and a clitoris and all of that, we're not taught enough about our bodies. How much time is really spent about hormones and menstrual cycles and menopause and what you can expect and what is healthy and normal in different phases of life and how your body works, and even pregnancy and post pregnancy are really interesting stages hormonally. I'm one of the sex and relationship experts for the Peanut app, and there's a lot of focus in that app about new moms and new moms making friends. And so I answer all the sex questions though. And so you really realize even that like post birth phase is actually very similar to menopause hormonally. And so people experience like some dryness, and people experience lower libido, and breastfeeding actually lowers libido. And it's like, why aren't we taught any of this about how our bodies work?
Well, even you just took, we'll get to that in a second, but even, talking about our bodies, how many people actually take a mirror and actually look and see what it looks like down there?
Yes, Debbie. 100%. And I mean, there's some statistics on that. I don't remember exactly what they were, but a huge number of people who have a vulva and vagina have not looked at it. And it's obviously it's different. It's not just like out there like a penis, but like you need to take a mirror. And so it's like, okay, maybe you're not going to be doing that like every day, but to familiarize yourself, to locate the parts of your own genitals and kind of know where they are and be able to communicate them with a partner, and even just for your health, right? Like even just knowing like what's proper hygiene. There's so much confusion around that. So it's like I feel like we're almost at like square one as a society, because so much information is legislated and managed or mandated, and it's like it creates this disconnect in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, that's a topic for a whole other show. Maybe we'll tackle that sometime.
Yeah.
But why is it that we don't talk about sex so openly as we're
Yeah.
doing right now?
Yeah. And I appreciate you kind of being willing to have this conversation with me, because I think the more we do, the more people will feel comfortable and more people will have those conversations. And then that will eventually lead to some changes on a societal level. I mean, part of why I do this work too is because I come from like a fairly repressed place. I was brought up with really negative messages around sexuality. I was raised Catholic, and it's kind of like, well, most people don't really wait till marriage, but like you should. And if you don't, then it's bad. And then you're also kind of brought up with the societal conditioning that, well, like men can be pretty sexual. And like men are supposed to be more into sex. Like women aren't like women should like maybe enjoy it, but shouldn't be too sexually active and shouldn't have too many partners. And even the words like promiscuous, I think is so interesting, because when I don't know if I even had a different word before. And then I met with my supervisor when I was getting certified to be a sex therapist. And she was kind of like, I'm like, what else do I even say? Like, because she was pointing out, like, that's a loaded word. That's like kind of a judgy word. And I was like, oh, and she was like, you could say sexually active. I'm like, it's so true. And so now I'm even so aware of when people say promiscuous and just noting that little bit of judgment that's
Yeah,
often
not
there.
even to mention the nastier words that are
I
said
mean,
around that, and
right.
many of them are women related.
Very good point, Abby. So yeah, so I mean, and then the messages I got in school, whereas here's how menstruation works a little bit, but then it was like, here's a live birth, and be very afraid, be very afraid of getting pregnant, and like really, you should never have sex. Abstinence is like the only safe way, and so it's just fear mongering. Where I internalized a lot of that. I internalized a lot of this idea that like sex is morally questionable. I had some judgment too, because that's how I was socialized. And so I really want people to kind of get to this place where we kind of own how we were raised, and we can kind of see it and develop some consciousness and some awareness, and then opt out. Like, this is what I was taught. This is like the culture and the messaging. Not so much working for me. Let's explore over here. Let's listen to Debbie's podcast. Let's listen to Heather's podcast. Let's like start planting some new seeds that are more positive. Because there's actually a lot of benefits to sex too.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, right?
Yeah, and I want to get into this because you call yourself a holistic sex therapist. So what do you mean by that?
For me, that means that I look at everything. When people come to me, especially with complex issues like libido, we don't just look at hormones. We don't just look at beliefs and religion and what you were taught. And we don't just look at the relationship. We look at all of it. Who are you as a whole person, bringing all of that to the table? Because I mean, what I found, sometimes I feel like I'm a sexual detective. Where it's like, let's just keep asking questions and like digging around and see what we find, because sometimes the answers surprise even me. I learn things from working with my clients, but I think it's really important to keep an open mind. Oh, and for me, I did a holistic health coach training. I was a Shambhala meditation guide. Obviously, I'm trained in sexuality and mental health. And so I'm really using all those lenses when I'm working with clients.
So is the problems that people have related to sex usually involve things that have nothing to do with sex?
Yes and no. Sometimes it's hard to just give a simple answer with these things, but sometimes it's directly related. So it could be like sexual trauma, for example, or it could be having some negative conditioning around sexuality. And then sometimes it's really not directly sexually related. So one of the most interesting things I've learned, especially around libido from working with clients, is that when we tend to compartmentalize our emotions, we kind of can't, is what I'm learning. We think we're compartmentalizing. We think we're just kind of tucking stuff away in like a little corner and like locking the door. And it just kind of doesn't work that way. So it's like when we start to shut things down, we kind of wind up shutting everything down, including our libido. And so my work with clients in that area, or when that issue applies to them, is to help them start feeling their feelings again. We wind up doing a lot more kind of deep emotional and psychological work that's not directly talking about sex.
And when those issues get resolved, then the sex follows.
Yes and no again. So what I've realized is like there's certain kind of criteria to create an environment in which great sex is possible. So I think that's kind of like a layer one of how I work with people. Like, let's first create the conditions that are like the prerequisite. So it's like, just because you then met the prerequisite doesn't mean that sex is like magically just happening. Sometimes there still needs to be an intentional effort to have your life have an opportunity for sex. A lot of times I'm working with parents of young kids who are just like touched out, and sex starts to feel like a chore and it's one more thing, and they don't even have time for themselves. So it's step one, get some alone time, manage your stress a little bit better, right? So that you have something to give, because there's giving involved in sex as well as receiving, of course. But so you have something to give, but then it might be step two is maybe listen to some audio erotica, maybe take better care of your body, work on your energy levels, look at food intolerances or like bloating issues that make you not feel sexy. So sometimes there's multiple components, and I think libido in particular is one of those areas where like there could be 5 pieces of the puzzle and we have to find all 5 of them.
Well, like I said, there are so many questions, and we have to take a break here. We were speaking with a certified sex therapist, Heather Shannon, all about sex, and we'll be right back. Hey, this is Debbie Spector-Weissman. I have a question for you. Are you a business owner with big dreams but struggling to turn them into reality? If so, I'm here to help you. I'm offering a free Dream Big Business Breakthrough session where we'll identify the biggest challenges holding you back and create a plan to overcome them. Don't wait too long, because this offer won't last forever. Take action today and book your free Dream Big Business Breakthrough session with me by visiting my website, thedreamcoach.net. Let's make your dreams a reality together.
Welcome back to Dream Power Radio with your host, Debbie Spector-Weissman.
Yes, welcome back to Dream Power Radio. I'm your host, Debbie Spector-Weissman, and we're talking all about sex with Heather Shannon. Well, Heather, let's talk about people who are in long-term relationships, whether they're married or just having a long-term relationship. What are the things that they need to do to keep sex exciting in their lives?
So I actually made a whole podcast episode about this, about keeping things spicy, because that's a huge question that I get for people in long-term relationships. A lot of people tell me that, hey, my partner kind of knows me, like knows my body, knows what works, but then just always does that. And so it's kind of like it's working, but it's not working. And this is where I think we have to be a little bit more willing to take some chances, which is a little bit vulnerable, and communicate, and maybe even like toss some ideas out there and like open up more discussion about sex with our partner. So the things that tend to block people with that is just the difficulty with being vulnerable, kind of the fear of rejection, the fear of like, well, it's not totally broken. Maybe we are having orgasms or it is feeling pleasurable, but at the same time, we're not exploring, we're not really being creative. There's not really as much excitement as there used to be. So there's a couple places to start with that. I actually made a quiz based on this, because when people ask me this question, I would maybe go in one direction of like, oh yeah, let's just get a little kinkier, and people would be like, oh no, that's not what I meant. And then they would be like, okay. They're like, we actually want to bring a third person into the bedroom. I'm like, oh, that's the direction you want to go in. Okay. Or people might really think, I want to try some different positions, or I'm sick of having sex in the bedroom all the time. Can we do something in different rooms of the house? And so I really realized there's almost like different sexual personalities, kind of. So I did make a quiz about spicing things up that people can access on my website. I think it's just at heathershannon.co/quiz. So it's pretty straightforward. The formatting is a little screwy, but the information is there. I give very robust recommendations for each type. But yeah, some of the stuff I just mentioned, maybe it's like, hey, let's try some power exchange, and someone's more in charge and someone's kind of less in charge. Or we try different positions where maybe when we have lower energy, we can find some positions where we're both kind of laying down, or we're more on our sides, or maybe we want more of like a sensual experience. And so maybe, hey, how can we create more romance? And can we even do some like breathing together? Maybe it's like a little bit of tantric breathing and synchronizing your breath with your partner before you even get to the sex part, just to kind of create more presence and create more connection. So there's infinite ways in which
And it all gets
spice it up.
down to that one word communication. When
It
we
does.
talk to our partners about, well, it's good, but let's make it great. And
I know. And I mean, you sound like you're a fan of that. I'm a fan of that. But I think what I find with a lot of people is there's just that fear of talking about it. And that's another podcast episode I did, is like the real reason you're not talking about sex. And basically it comes down to fear of rejection. People are afraid of losing this person. People are afraid of not having the security if they like rock the boat in the relationship at all. They're afraid of like ruining a good thing. And they're even afraid of ruining a mediocre thing. And I kind of think, what if you have enough inner security? And I think this is kind of ultimately the answer, where you're going to be okay regardless. And your mission is to show up in your authenticity and show up in truth, and whatever happens, and you're going to be okay. You might feel some painful feelings. You might have to work through some things in the relationship. I think the vast majority of the time, this is not like a relationship ending type of thing, but it's like our primitive brains kind of go there. So we kind of got to like overcome the primitive brains and like build that inner security so that we can have these conversations and then have an amazing
anytime
sex
you're talking about something that involves change, it brings up that horrible four-letter word fear. And then we make up stories about what's going to happen. And usually the story is far worse than whatever the reality is. Let's say that you're having a relationship with a partner, your sex is okay, and one partner says, and you'll be doing kind of the same thing over and over and over, and it's worked for a while. And let's say one partner says, hey, let's try bondage or some really way different than what they're doing. And the other partner is reluctant. How can they resolve those differences? Is there a compromise that could be made? What kind of communication has to be done to resolve that?
I think that's a tricky one. I think that we're never going to line up 100% in terms of sexual compatibility, but I do see people where they don't really line up much at all in terms of what they want in the bedroom. So I think we need that sort of critical mass of compatibility to start, because if you don't have that, you're kind of just like going uphill and working against the grain the whole rest of your sex life. So find someone that you have enough overlap with. That's like step one. Then, okay, let's say you find a partner where like you've at least overlapped on 50% of the things that you're really into. And you got to work on the other 50% a little bit if you want to feel really satisfied. So my advice to people is to push yourself out of your comfort zone a little bit. This doesn't mean doing something that feels unsafe. This doesn't mean doing something that you really would feel uncomfortable to like a great degree. But this is kind of like if you're in the middle, if you're a little bit like lukewarm, could go either way, you're on the side of giving it a shot. Because if you have a couple who tries 20 new things and only 10 of them work and the other 10 kind of like bomb and are weird or awkward or just not sexy, that couple still has 10 new things now that they can incorporate into their repertoire versus the couple that's like, ooh, we don't want something to go poorly, so we're just not going to try anything at all. So I think you kind of got to create an environment with each other of, hey, we're in this together. We're going to try some new things. We're going to be okay if it's awkward. That's not going to ruin us. We're just going to laugh about it. Or we're going to be okay if it's not sexy because like, hey, then we actually know each other that much better and we even know ourselves that much better. So I think if you're able to find the benefit and the meaning of even just the effort, I had a couple I worked with that made such an incredible transformation in their sex life. And I think like one of their turning points that really helped them was the wife saying to the husband, like, it doesn't have to go perfectly. Like literally just you showing up and trying means the world to me. And I think if we can get to that place where we're like creating this foundation of security and love, or even just like friendship, whatever the dynamic is, like then you can kind of try anything and still be good.
Right. So is that like where romance comes into the picture as opposed to just sex?
Where you said where romance comes into the picture?
Yeah.
I don't think it has to be romance. I think it could be friendship. I think it's just kind of saying like, even if it's like a friend with benefits situation, it's kind of just saying like, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not looking to run away. We have a fun connection going on. And if we try some stuff and it doesn't work, that's okay. It's not going to break us. I think people can kind of make it too high stakes. So I think there's an element of lowering the stakes and just kind of being a little more lighthearted about it, if anything. But yeah, bondage is an interesting one. I think that is one where someone might feel unsafe and be like, no, that's just a hard no for me. In which case I would say, okay, don't go there right now. Find a different area to explore. But somebody might feel like just uncomfortable because I really don't get it. And I really don't understand like what the appeal is. And I just don't know that that's going to be my thing. But I'm not unsafe and I trust my partner. And then that person, I would say, give it a shot, but do some education first, maybe find a book, find a podcast, find a talk or something where you can get some of your questions answered ahead of time, which probably is going to lower the fear. So much fear, like you said, is with change or like unknown. So if we reduce the unknown, I think that could be a really good strategy. I also think with anything where there could be like a safety element, that education is really important, because if people do like rope bondage, for example, and don't do it right, like there could actually be nerve damage. So be smart.
Right. Right. And something you said before, I think also needs to be emphasized too. Have a sense of humor about it
Yes.
all.
Yes.
Because
Right. It's like, it's not so serious.
right. If anything, sex should be fun.
Yeah. Like, yes, let's emphasize
Right.
fun. And I think that goes back to like taking the emphasis off the orgasm and like putting the emphasis on the process and the journey. It's like, you're just having an experience. So have a fun one.
Okay. I do want to take this point though to talk a little bit about the man, because it's no
Okay.
secret that men sometimes have problems getting and maintaining erections. So
Sure. Yeah.
how does a couple still have a satisfying sex life when they have issues like this?
Yeah, that is a really common one. Erectile dysfunction is also very holistic, or it can be. It actually can be one of the first signs of heart issues. So it is something where you probably want to get checked out by a doctor just to make sure that it's not a heart issue. It can also be strictly psychological. A lot of times someone hasn't experienced erectile dysfunction, then all of a sudden they do, and then they get in their head about it, and then like anxiety takes over, and then the erections have disappeared, and you're not having fun, and both people feel uncomfortable. So I do think in that case, it's worth working with a sex coach or a sex therapist on that mental part. Sometimes it's both, right? Like I've had clients where there's definitely a psychological component and we make some progress working on that. And they find when they take their blood pressure medication that their erections are better. They're being more consistent. I also had a client switch to a keto diet and it was like night and day. And he's like, I hadn't had any like nighttime erections for like many months. And all of a sudden now I've had a few since kind of reducing the inflammation in my body. So I actually think that there is often a health component with erectile dysfunction and a psychological component. There tends to be a little bit of both in my experience working with people. There could be a testosterone issue going on. So how do you address it? I think it kind of goes back to like the lightheartedness a little bit too. It's like not the end of the world. You're going to figure it out. There are ways to figure it out. There are people who have come before you who have figured it out. You will too. So I think if you believe that, then it's like, okay, like we'll resolve this. I'm not totally sure what it is right now, but in the meantime, we can focus on oral sex. We can focus on using toys. We can focus on hand jobs. You know, there's like so many options that are often not is explored. And it's actually really interesting because I think that the emphasis on penetration actually is part of the orgasm gap. I don't know if you've heard of the orgasm gap, but basically straight men are having more orgasms than straight women, and lesbian women are having quite a few more orgasms than straight women as well. And so you're like, like what could be some of the differences? And all of this is theory, I will say. None of this is like factual hard science at this point, except for the research data. So we don't know why exactly, but you could speculate that if it's two women, there might be a little bit less focus on penetration. There might be a little more focus on what we would call outer course, like the oral sex, hand jobs, just attention to the clitoris, basically. So I think if people realize, like, okay, maybe we could just kind of be a little humble, try and like work through some of the ego issues with the erectile dysfunction, notice what meaning we're making out of it, and like change it up, use it as an opportunity to like be a little more creative. You know, a lot of times when we have a constraint is when we are able to get really creative.
I see. Okay,
Yeah.
like I said at the beginning, there were so many questions, and Heather, I only have time for this final one.
Okay, all right.
Find out more about you and your work.
Oh, well, thank you. That's a nice question. So yeah, people can visit me at heathershannon.co, and they can also check out my podcast, Ask a Sex Therapist. So that's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you find podcasts.
Wonderful. Well, Heather, thank you so much for being on Dream Power Radio today.
Thanks for having me, Debbie. This was awesome.
Okay, we've been speaking all about sex with certified sex therapist Heather Shannon. Hope you've enjoyed today's program. If so, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Until next time, this is Debbie Spector-Weissman saying, sweet dreams, everybody.
You've been listening to Dream Power Radio with your host, Debbie Spector-Weissman. For more information on Debbie or to sign up for her newsletter, go to dreampowerradio.com. This has been Dream Power Radio.